let's get started with this. Let's get started with this FD Signifier Unk vid. It's got 600,000 views in 3 days. How the Trump actually win? Now, I think I'm going to have some reasonable and mild disagreements with Unk here. All right. As far as I understand, people have been trying to get me to watch this for a minute. So I'm excited to see it. Let's go. And then we'll do the drama a little bit.
All right. Not a lot of fun and games today. We're going to jump right in.
Unk is a little libbed up.
I did a live the day after the election where Donald Trump became only the second president in American history to win a non-consecutive term by convincingly beating Kamala Harris, and emotions were high, limited information was available. But based on what I had seen and what I had been hearing at that time, I made the proclamation in this live that the core reason Kamala Harris lost her bid for presidency of the United States was misogyny and racism. I base this not just on my general beliefs on the pervasiveness of sexism and racism in this country, but on the fact that at the time, the early data indicated that there was a huge decrease in voter turnout for her specifically with rural and suburban white men. Many folks, including more moderate leftists and liberals, agreed with this take, but also disagreed with the take. Others that I would call my peers politically, and some even further left than I, felt like this take was erroneous and in some ways let the Democrats off the hook for their many mistakes, their many mistakes during this election cycle. Or like their liberals, ironically, they didn't like the finger being pointed at white people when there's black men, Latino men, and Palestinians to take the blame. I found both of these responses frustrating as neither really aligned with how I saw the whole situation. But at the time, I didn't have enough data and I hadn't talked to enough people to feel too confident in my own take. But now, some weeks later, as most of the details and info are near final, along with being able to observe and process a lot of other people's opinions in the aftermath, I want to return to this opinion with a little more data. That's what we'll be doing in this video, using a mostly data-driven approach to explain why Kamala Harris lost, or better yet, why Donald Trump won, and what lessons could and should be learned from this election. I want to first make a few things clear. Here in the swing state of Georgia where I live, I voted for Kamala Harris. I didn't do this out of an alignment to the politics that Kamala represented or ran on, especially in the latter part of her campaign. I didn't do this with the mythical hope that she would be pushed left. That just doesn't really happen. I voted for Kamala Harris because of the two devils I was faced with. I preferred her, the devil I knew. To many, that is unsatisfactory. And to those of you who feel this way, it is what it is. To me, the world is already in a hellscape situation, and I personally find no solace in the individual victory that would have been a protest or third-party vote, nor did I think that it would make a difference, and we'll look at why that's completely true later on. I am not of the mind that a Trump presidency and a Kamala Harris presidency would have been indiscernible from each other. On a grand scale, that's likely true, but at a micro level, at an interpersonal level, and at an immediate level, I think this is demonstrably false, and I don't think anyone who's serious can say that to be a fact across the board. Trump's 4 years as president before were harmful in numerous ways that were unique to him, including his handling of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, which was made worse by his incompetence. But I digress. I'm only bringing this up because I also don't want this video to be mistaken as a defense for Kamala Harris or the Democrats. And it's really frustrating that our political discourse on the left has been so atomized and just made into content garbage that people who take nuanced look at these complex issues end up having to be in one camp or another. Like, I'm literally in the moment have done this take like 10 times because I'm trying to find the words to say how frustrating it is to want to have a nuanced conversation around electoralism when there's people that if you don't support Kamala Harris, they don't want to hear anything you want to say, even though there's obvious reasons to not support Kamala Harris. And people that don't support Kamala Harris feel like there's no logical or moral reason to vote for her regardless, as if anything in our political reality is that black and white. But it is what it is.
Have you already forgot us, the chat, since you're already almost mainstream Monk? First of all, no. And being quote unquote almost mainstream doesn't change anything. This is where I choose to be.
I feel like it's important to continue challenging my more liberal and moderate audience to dispose of the belief that Democrats are on our side. At best, they hold us hostage and force us to be complicit in their failings and atrocities by holding the knife to our throat that is the Republican Party. But I also think the grandstanding and finger wagging, often by people who are least affected by the threat that is the Republican Party, is just as ridiculous, especially when that ideology veers into, I'll just call it magical thinking at this point. But for those who still don't understand why the Democrats are bad, I'll link some other videos that break down their failings in the description. With that out of the way, let's get to it. As of writing, with 99% of the vote in nationwide, Kamala Harris has 73,879,941 votes, and Trump has 76,528,802 votes. This ranks second and fourth all time in popular votes for president. And this is with 90 million eligible voters deciding to stay home, which, believe it or not, is typical for non-voters. Usually voter turnout is around 60 to 65%. However, one important detail that we'll come back to a few times is that in 2020, Joe Biden set the record for popular votes with 81 million votes.
Yeah, and the reason for that obviously was because of, and this is something that like a lot of people argue for when talking about expanding access, but when you expand voting access, when you make it easier to vote, yeah, more people end up voting. That's it. It's that simple.
Important fact to point out here is that Kamala Harris got around 7 million votes less than Joe Biden did back in 2020 nationwide. Now, you might immediately look at that and say this is because Kamala ran a bad campaign and because she campaigned on the wrong things that her base and regular people did not care about. Or you may immediately look and say that Kamala is a victim of sexism and racism because the same people that voted for Biden, whose campaign was exactly like hers, did not vote for her. And I think when you're looking,
do you think Biden would have won without COVID? No. I've said that before. No, of course not. No shot. And this doesn't even mean that like Donald Trump was super popular. He was not either. But the lack of examination of the way that most Americans feel about the establishment, what they think the establishment is quite literally the reason why I think the Democrats are always slated to lose. That's it. Like unless they, in my opinion, unless they change trajectory and stop being so fearful of upsetting like corporate mega donors and openly communicate their desire in an earnest way to improve people's material realities, they're just not. They're going to keep getting hamstered. Yeah, and it wasn't even just COVID. It was also Trump getting COVID like a week before the election, like, and reminding everybody how dangerous COVID was.
At it at a national level, it's hard to be definitive because we're talking about all.
Why can't we pressure the AFL-CIO to start a labor third party? What are you talking about? The AFL-CIO is like basically an arm of the Democratic Party.
50 states, many with complex dynamics of how voting plays out. There's reasons to think that Kamala failed to inspire nationwide with a campaign that started late, where American people didn't get to choose her, and her campaign was not overly detailed on policy. And the stuff that was emphasized showed her to be a centrist and a moderate, which much of the base might not have been into. I would argue that much of her rhetoric at the Democratic National Convention in August was more suited for a moderate Republican than a Democrat. She talked about securing borders, having a strong military. She avoided addressing identity politics. She campaigned with Liz Cheney. One of her biggest things she would talk about was how she was supported by the Republican establishment, and most alarmingly, she refused to engage with any talk of ending the United States' role in the ongoing genocide in Palestine. In the aftermath of her loss, many pundits and insiders have came out to make accusations that her campaign wasn't very good and the groundwork strategy was flawed. Some point out that the way she got the nomination was problematic.
I don't even think the groundwork strategy was flawed. I compare this to like, I increase the speed. I compare Kamala. I can't even talk. I compare Kamala Harris's situation, her electoral strategy, her campaigning to a person that has a massive arsenal. Okay. You can have an army. You can have all the best weapons, but if your bullets are all duds, you're not gonna succeed. That's it. Kamala Harris had a fundraising advantage. Kamala Harris had better ground game, but the message coming from the top that everyone that was door knocking was delivering was and ineffective. That's it. That's it. You can have an army. You can have all the weapons. But if you're firing blanks, you're not going to win. And that is precisely what happened.
Problematic to begin with. There's a whole lot of things to criticize about Kamala's strategy before you even begin to consider how this strategy was either informed by or was structured to deal with the fact that she was a black woman. Since the election, I've talked to a lot of black women, and one thing that's been said to me multiple times is that as a black woman in these types of spaces, it doesn't matter what you say or do or what you say you're going to do, you will always be received as woke and emotional and inherently incompetent and all these things. And one could argue that the conservatism of her campaign was an effort to counter counteract that natural narrative, a narrative that if you look at exit polls, she definitely seemed to stick to her despite her flawed campaign. And I'm not saying that to say that her campaign was good. I'm just saying it helps explain one of the reasons why it was the way it was. However, this doesn't seem to matter when you look at the data. When you zoom in from the national level and just look at the 7 key swing states that really decided this election, you begin to really get some answers. For those unaware or outside the US, our presidential elections are some key. The country has 50 states, right? And each state is worth a certain amount of points. If you win that state by getting the most votes in that state, you get all 20 points. Even if you only got 51% of the vote, you still get all 20 points. What this ends up doing is making it so 5 to 10 states that are up for grabs really control the entire election. And that's because most states in America consistently vote in a very specific way. Some states like Minnesota, for example, haven't voted for a Republican for president since 1968. States like Texas, on the other hand, haven't voted for a Democrat since 1972. This means that any analysis of the election that doesn't hyper-focus on what happened in those states isn't necessarily the greatest analysis, because in those states is where
if they were going to call her woke, then why tack to the right anyway? Should have gone left. Yeah, that's the problem. It's running from a place of fear, and Democrats do it. If I'm going to be super charitable to the Democrats and not assume the position that they want to lose, that they want to be the controlled opposition, that they want to be a hurdle in the face of like real leftist movements in this country, and that they do actually want to win. And I'm certain that there are plenty of people who do want that, right? Within the ranks of the Democratic Party, they're just bad at their jobs. Then I think that they are running from a place of fear. They're always running scared. They're always terrified of their opposition. They always allow the opposition to flood the market with whatever kind of like nonsensical positions that they invent, that they concoct in a laboratory half the time at a think tank, right? And then they always run defense. And they're always running defense in territory that is more beneficial for the Republican Party. Running defense on the issue of immigration and adopting the right-wing framing on the issue of immigration, you're cooked. You're cooked. Like I've said before, it's like, you know, instead of playing one-on-one basketball with LeBron, you decide to, I don't know, play chess. Like on the one hand, you got a grandmaster in chess. On the other hand, you have the grandmaster of basketball, LeBron James. And the Republican Party being the grandmaster of chess is like, I dictate the terms. We're playing chess. We're not playing basketball. It doesn't make sense. Just play basketball. Why the did you play chess? You're LeBron James.
The voting population has and feels the most responsibility. This is where campaigns spend the most money, and this is where the campaign's successes or failures are really reflected, and where data and feedback is most valuable. So that's where I'm going to focus most of my analysis on. And when you focus the analysis on the 7 battleground states, you start to see some really interesting features. In 2024, there were 7 battleground states: North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin. Kamala Harris lost all of them. However, the narrative that I presented a second ago about her flawed campaign, that voters stayed home because she ran too far to the right and didn't support Palestine, that she didn't run on any policies, etc., that doesn't really hold up here, because in 4 of the 7 swing states, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada, Kamala Harris actually outdid Joe Biden in 2020. That's from small numbers. It's not like she outdid him by a whole lot. But considering that Joe Biden had 7 million more votes nationwide, the fact that Kamala Harris kept up with him in these 4 battleground states indicates that she wasn't doing nearly as bad as people are trying to say she was. And in the 3 states where she didn't outdo him, Michigan.
Okay. As far as especially Georgia, like if we're going to talk about Georgia, Joseph Robinette Brandon, 2.4 million votes, Kamala Harris, 2.5 million votes. The reality of the matter is this is because of changing demographics in the state of Georgia. Okay. A lot of this can be, a lot of this will be like actual demographic patterns shifting in the state of Georgia, population growth in general. Okay. As far as North Carolina goes, these are areas that they like very openly and very actively targeted. The problem is none of these areas were the areas where they were supposed to, none of these areas were the areas that were supposed to put up numbers. The real numbers were supposed to come from the blue wall. They're hyper-focused on North Carolina, especially, where she did outperform Joe Biden and still lost. You're scrambling, FD got your number? No. hyper focusing on these other states when your battleground states that are going to get you the victory, being the blue wall, was a mistake. Wisconsin being one of the examples. And even then, when they hyper focused on the blue wall states, okay, they did a horrible job at it. Look at this. Like, what do you mean? Like, trying to tap undecideds, independents, and moderate Republicans is just like failing spectacularly to do so. Of course you were going to lose. I don't understand what FD's argument here is. Like, is he just saying that Trump is simply too popular to beat? Is he saying that? I don't fully understand what his argument is here. Like,
that she wasn't doing nearly as bad as people are trying to say she was. And in the 3 states where she didn't outdo him, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, she got within around 70,000 votes or less. So he didn't blow her out there either. Now, you may still feel that Kamala's campaign was bad because you don't like her politics or tactics on a specific personal level. And I would agree with all of those opinions. However, that doesn't mean her campaign was ineffective. The numbers say that it was. The difference is in Trump and some of the specific voter bases that he was able to pull in those same states, as well as specific voters that did not show up for Harris that showed up for Biden. While all the criticisms that you probably have of Harris and her campaign are true, I still think the results are more consistent with this country's deep-rooted misogyny and racism. I know people don't like that.
Yeah, the reason why I don't like this argument is because the solution to this argument literally is never run a black woman ever again. And I disagree with that on principle. Never run a woman of color ever again is not a good solution to this. And I do agree that like racism and misogyny always is going to factor into it. This is something that I talked to Estet about as well. If you recall, and something that FD also brought forward originally, which is the idea that, no matter what Kamala Harris said or did, she was going to be considered woke. She's a black woman from Oakland, okay? A black woman from California. Of course, she was too woke for a lot of people because they were not even considering anything. When you stand for nothing, seemingly, okay, people will make their minds up about what you stand for. And this is a major problem with the Democrats. They get bullied relentlessly and mercilessly. They get written out. That's the reason why, while Americans are on board with progressive policies, as long as it's a faceless, lifeless ballot initiative not attached to the Democratic Party, people vote for it overwhelmingly. But the moment that you put a Democrat on in charge of, defending said policy, people go, ugh, I don't want that. It's gross. The Democrats have a Riz problem. I think where FD loses some ground in his analysis that it wasn't an unknown. The numbers projected this months ago. We knew she was keeping up with Trump, but that wasn't enough. We knew this. Her deciding to continue this campaign is a campaign decision. Exactly. This is something that I pointed to time and time again throughout the campaign. Months leading up to the election, Kamala Harris would come out and spend like $30 million in one of these specific markets, right? And it wouldn't even move. It wouldn't even move her polling in the direction that was necessary for her to secure a victory. And I kept saying, like, what are we doing? I mean, it's clear that the message is not working if you're pumping, if you're flooding the TV markets in Pennsylvania and the suburbs and whatnot. Like, it's obvious that the message is not working. You got to change the message. Central Committee says she lost the election in the industrial cities in the Rust Belt because young people and black people had low enthusiasm. We saw it coming weeks before, at least you and I did. Look at his old post. Is he saying that black people and young people hate black women? Make it make sense? No, I think he's talking about. I mean, I do think that there's definitely still a ton of people who were not on board with her for her being a black woman, like people that otherwise might have voted for her that stayed home because she's a black woman, for sure. I mean, it's automatically correct. But you're also you're not wrong when you point to this. Like, there wasn't enthusiasm at the end of the day. There wasn't enough enthusiasm from a lot of working class individuals for the Democratic Party, just like there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm, in my opinion, from a lot of these blue wall states, from the normal constituencies that the Democratic Party relies on.
So let me address some of the common arguments that I've seen against this take. So one of the main things I've seen is that Kamala lost because of abstainers and third-party voters, most of which who had the genocide in Palestine as a deal breaker. All that said, very little data points to those people having a significant effect.
Yeah, they didn't. Kamala Harris lost by wider margins than like third-party votes would go in her favor. And not only that, but also Third party votes are not to be taken for granted. There's the automatic assumption. Nothing signals. Ogre Boy says nothing signals to people worried about the Middle East like glazing the architect of the Iraq War while on your campaign tour. Like, this was a massively consequential decision, in my opinion. It was because you have a finite amount in your truncated campaign to basically craft a message to show America who you are and what you stand for. And that actually offers a wonderful opportunity, especially when you're Kamala Harris and you're basically a blank sheet of paper, right? And instead of using that opportunity to just like put forward a bold declarative agenda that is going to address a lot of the issues that people are experiencing, going along on this like, I'm right wing, I want a muscular border policy, I'm the top cop, all this was not great. I think they did think, well, Kamala Harris is a black woman, she's younger than Joe Biden, so a lot of the normal constituencies that go out and vote for the Democratic Party will come out and vote for her regardless. And that didn't happen. They just, many of them stayed home. And it's crazy because like a lot of people have written off Gaza, for example, from the equation, or falsely attribute just the third party momentum, which was lackluster. It was nowhere near where it was supposed to be. And say, oh, well, people went and voted for the third party, but they didn't vote for the third party by large enough margins. Clearly, Gaza's not an issue. Like, no, there's a ton of people who just didn't vote. There are a ton of people who just didn't vote because that was an issue for them. Okay? Straight up. And if the election is won in the Electoral College, there were plenty of people that if you had a different attitude on Gaza, if you had a different way to communicate and truly show that you were going to change trajectory on Gaza in comparison to Joe Biden, who was horrifyingly unpopular on this issue, yeah, those people could have been brought into the fold. Those people could have come out and voted for you. You cast them aside, and that's part of the reason why you lost. It's not the most consequential reason. There's no singular, like, silver bullet here, right? The elections are complicated. There is no one thing like, oh, if you do this and then you win. I don't agree with that. Sometimes I think even in my commentary, people hear parts of my analysis and they agree with it. So they think like, no, this is the singular policy. But whenever I talk about Gaza specifically, I'm referencing the polls that I saw leading up to the election for months. And how many people openly came out and said like, yo, this is important to me. And it wasn't this like sectarian fight either. It wasn't this sectarian only Arabs or only Muslims care about Gaza either. There was a lot of people across the board that I think would have been more enthused to go out and vote for Kamala Harris, at least according to the polls that showed that she would get at least like a 2-point boost in 7 of the swing states, the 7 of the battleground states. Yeah, this is a Hasan Abihed who made this. Here are the 34 polls that show a ceasefire and weapons embargo help Kamala win. Michigan is the blue wall state that swung the most against Harris in this election. It's very clear it had an effect. This is quite frankly an attempt by left liberal progressives that told you to just vote for Harris for harm reduction, trying to pretend that it wasn't a bad strategy to win. If Harris had separated herself from Biden on Gaza and other issues, she would have been more likely to win. I agree. I think she always had a tough road ahead. She had a truncated campaign. She was attached to the hip to a historically unpopular incumbent. You are not going to win an election like that. It's very difficult. It's an uphill battle no matter what. She's running for president in a country that is historically misogynistic and racist, running against a guy who is also misogynistic and racist himself. So all of these are issues. But just like when I tell a short man or an incel that they need to swing they need to recognize the issues that they have in the dating marketplace and work against those weaknesses, the structural hurdles that are placed upon them. I'm telling the Kamala Harris campaign this entire time, these are the realities that you are aware of. Work against them. Okay? Just be taller or you're an incel? No. The dichotomy is short king or a manlet. You never want to be a manlet. You always want to be a short king. There are plenty of short kings out there. The difference is confidence. The difference is the way you carry yourself. I'm not, I love my short kings. You know this. As a tall lit, I am an advocate for the taller side, okay? People like me have had it far too good for far too long, all right? I'm a class traitor for the talls, against the talls. The Taliban? I'm a height trader. Yep, I am. But yeah, when you don't have a lot of leeway and you know that the deck is stacked against you, you can't be making mistakes. And their whole campaign was a mistake.
Prominent third-party candidate left to Kamala who did not support the genocide was Jill Stein. And in no swing state did Stein get even a full 1% of the vote. In Wisconsin and Georgia, she didn't even come in third. I know some truly principled leftists actually voted for Donald Trump in protests, which, okay. But I seriously doubt that that was enough to really make the difference here to put the loss on Stein and protest voters. You could argue that more principled anti-genocide voters just stayed home, but that would clash with the aforementioned fact that turnout was up in swing states. Stein did her best in Michigan, where there is a large Muslim population, where there was also a well-organized effort against the Harris campaign because of her response to the genocide. But even in Michigan, if you add all of Stein's votes to Kamala's, she would still lose. This is important to point out for a few reasons, but for the moment, I really wanted to sink in with liberals and moderates who have went full mask off online with their vitriol towards the people of Palestine and the anti-genocide movement. In the days and weeks after the election, many on social media pointed at Palestinians and their supporters as the cause of Harris's loss, and it was gross and abhorrent to witness. People posted videos of them going to Starbucks, which, by the way, Starbucks was never actually involved in any boycott related to Palestine. That's just a significant marker of how uninformed a lot of us are online, myself included. But regardless of whether or not Starbucks was a part of the anti-Palestine movement, the fact that people were going there explicitly to spite Palestinians, that shit is whack. That shit is fucked up. All you should be ashamed of yourselves. People argued, well, these folks are just angry and they should be allowed to vent their anger and express their emotions without being judged. And sure, maybe, but in that regard, where is that same empathy for Palestinians who are actively being bombed right now? Of all the things that came out of the election, this was the most disappointing to me because I genuinely expected better. And in some situations, I don't know why I did. But I'll come back to this. Another thing that people point out is that certain progressive ballot measures won in states that Kamala lost. For example, in Arizona and Nevada, they established a state right to abortion. This even won in the deep red state of Missouri. And in these particular situations, progressive ballot measures won big time, sometimes getting more votes than Trump and Harris in a particular state. So this would be a good argument against the misogyny and racism issue if you don't actually understand the difference between progressive politics and progressive policies. Many people will point out that progressive policies like universal healthcare, gun control, abortion, all tend to be popular issues that most of the nation agrees upon. The problem there is how these issues are seen if they're connected to or in any way can be seen as supporting of.
Yeah, this is a certified Hasan I would take as well. Okay. I always say this. Progressive policy is popular, but unfortunately, people who, carry themselves as progressive politicians are not as popular as the policies themselves.
Black people who are seen as undeserving. Whenever an issue is connected to black people in this country, white people will vote against that issue essentially out of spite. Right now, they're trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which is known to white people, a specific type of white people, as Obamacare. These are people that will literally lose their health care if Obamacare is repealed, but because it has the name Obama on it, they do not care, or they don't care enough to actually know what will happen to them. And we've seen this historically in America. The easiest example comes from the history of programs such as the New Deal or the GI Bill. Both of these programs provided massive subsidies, social welfare, and handouts to predominantly white people across the country, enabling the largest growth of the middle class in modern history, but only for white people, as both of these programs were greatly impossible to access for African Americans. And when people started even hinting at the idea that African Americans should start to benefit from these programs, public opinion on these programs changed. People started looking at them as welfare and handouts to the undeserving. And all of these programs saw drastic cuts in subsequent years. White Americans were fine with cutting off their own well-being if it meant that black Americans were cut off too. There's an old saying that a white man will shit his own pants just to make a black man smell it. Moving on. Split ticket wins for Democrats in Senate and governorship seats don't prove anything regarding Kamala Harris's candidacy and campaign. One of the more frustrating arguments I've encountered is people saying that you can't call it racism or sexism because Ilhan Omar won her election in Michigan, or these two other black women won in Maryland and Delaware. Further, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina had Senate or gubernatorial victories for Democrats, but those states did not go for Kamala Harris. How can you call it racism and sexism when other black women and other Democrats were supported in situations where Kamala was not? Again, this sounds like a sound argument until you go back to look at the data of what actually happened. The first one is easy. Ilhan Omar is a House representative of Minnesota's 5th District, a deep blue district in a state that, again,
everybody calm down, okay? Yeah, it's Ilhan, but it's fine.
Hasn't voted for a Republican for president since 1968, meaning that Kamala still won it in 2024. You can't compare Ilhan to Kamala because once Ilhan Omar won her primary, her re-election was basically a formality. There was already a world of support for her against any Republican opponent. She won with less than 300,000 votes. There's no comparing these two races on scale alone, let alone the fact that that was an easy mode win for both of them. The same can be said for the black women that ran as Democrats in Delaware and Maryland. In any situation where you're in a deep blue state, just like I explained with the Electoral College a second ago, you pretty much know who's always going to be in power in that state based off that population. Of black people elected as senators in the United States, historically, the only Democrat to win in a non-deep blue state is Raphael Warnock here in Georgia. And that's partially because he's here in Georgia, where things are changing here. The rest are either black Republicans or winning in states like Illinois, New Jersey, California, etc. And again, neither of these black women, Lisa Blunt Rochester in Maryland or Angela Alsor Brooks in Delaware, won their seats in non-deep blue states. Not to take anything away from those sisters, it's just not the same level of difficulty or scrutiny that Harris faced as president. So what about Tommy Baldwin in Wisconsin or Jackie Rosa in Nevada, two swing states that were victories for Democrats? Surely this indicates something uniquely bad about Kamala and her campaign strategy. But again, not from the data, from the way I see it. In both of those states, Kamala Harris got more votes than the senatorial candidates. She even got more votes in Michigan than Erica Slotson, who won a Senate seat there, where she had the most resistance from the left and from Muslim protesters. She did get literally a few hundred votes less than Tommy Baldwin in Wisconsin, and it does look like she won't get more votes than Ruben Gallo in Arizona, who seems like he's going to win that seat. And she also didn't beat the incumbent Democratic governor of North Carolina, but there's some very significant reasons why that was always going to be a blowout.
Yeah, no, that was... I don't think you can make analysis off of like gubernatorial races, even if they're on the same ballot. You know, I've described this many times over. It's like not only was Mark Robinson insane, but I would go so far as say the Mark Robinson election is similar to the Gallego one. You know what I mean? Where it's like these people were placed against like really uniquely bad and uniquely weak candidates that were riddled with scandal, and they didn't have the same level of like rizz or national prominence that Donald Trump had. Like their opposition didn't. And I think despite that, you still can't look at a gubernatorial race regardless. Plenty of examples of right-wing states, deep right states with, blue governors, and plenty of deep blue states with right-wing governors. Like, look at Vermont, look at Kentucky, right? Vermont is a right-wing governor, despite being a deep blue state, and Kentucky has a liberal governor, despite being a deep red state. So people, I think, have a very different approach to their governor. They see it as like They don't care about like party loyalty as much. It's not uncommon to have that happen.
Beat the incumbent Democratic governor of North Carolina, but there's some very significant reasons why that was always going to be a blowout win for the Dems there. But overall, in these other high-stakes elections, it doesn't point to a unique rejection of Kamala by her voter base for any reason that would align with some of the criticism I mentioned earlier. In fact, almost all of those candidates ran with the same type of policies that Kamala did. Overall, she did great in the swing states, and had she just won the states where she did outdo Joe Biden, she would be the president right now. But she didn't, because Donald Trump significantly outdid his own performance from 4 years ago. And once we get into those numbers, it forces us to face some really hard realities. So let's return to those Senate races in Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, and Arizona, and especially Pennsylvania, because they also tell us some other things once you look at the numbers. The voter results in these races, to me, point to the most important detail about what really happened in this election. Again, Kamala lost all of these states, but outside of Pennsylvania and Arizona, she outdid Biden's performance. Further, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, and Arizona were Senate wins for Democrats. This means that not only did Trump win these states, not only did he outdo Biden's numbers in most of them in 2020, but he also outdid his own Republican running mates in these same states, because Trump would win the state, but Democrats would win the Senate. And the gaps here are pretty significant margins. As of writing, in Wisconsin, Trump got 1,697,769 votes and won the state. The Republican senatorial candidate got 1,641,181 votes, a significant but not so wide margin akin to how Kamala did in similar situations. In Michigan, Trump got 2,814,316 votes. The Republican candidate got 2,691,621 votes, a pretty significant gap. In Arizona, Trump got 1,764,862 votes. The Republican candidate got 1,591,318.
Yeah. Sean the Black says, so if Trump captured non-voters while Kamala didn't, it's not a campaign issue. That's what I'm saying. If you if you draw turnout from low and mid propensity voters and that secures you an electoral W, then yeah, it's a campaign failure. It's a communications failure. It is an ideological failure from the tippy top of the Democratic establishment. The very fact that it was even, the very fact that there was even any sort of question that Donald Trump could potentially win the popular vote. And I kept repeating this over and over again throughout the campaign. And everyone was like, I don't know about that, man. That's crazy. Like, that, to me, spells chaos for the future of the Democratic Party at a time when the Republican Party should be in a state of disarray.
18 votes, again, another significant gap. In Nevada, Trump got 751,205 votes. The Republican candidate there got 677,046 votes, a significant gap considering the size of the state. And in Pennsylvania, the one place where a Republican actually won their race on a split ticket, Trump got 3,538,989 votes, and the Republican senatorial candidate got 3,395,274 votes. Again, a large gap in a state where the Republican actually won. This pattern is replete nationwide with Trump in solid red states. There were millions of people nationwide that went into a voting booth on election day with no interest in voting for any other candidate on their ballot other than Donald Trump. They checked one box and then turned their ballot in. Now, this isn't something that never happens. Federal elections always have higher turnout, but it's significant to see the scale at which the nation, or more explicitly, people in these swing states, showed up for the old racist, adulterous, treasonous, rapist felon, as opposed to the black woman district attorney who branded herself as a cop. So who are these people? You already know. Like, why? I shouldn't have to make this fucking video. I shouldn't have to make this fucking video. The data I've seen indicates that there are white men in the suburbs and rural areas. I even had Nicholas Nameless help me out by doing a spreadsheet of all the counties in these swing states just to make sure this was true. NBC's exit polls also show that among white voters in key states, Kamala lost marginally suburban voters and significantly rural voters. These are almost categorically white voters, which correlates to her vote numbers amongst whites. In those key battleground states, she only got 37% of white men and 45% of white women. When you look at the proportion of the vote she got in those areas compared to Biden, they shrink in almost every situation, which meant that Trump got to run up the score, which meant that even though she got close in many of those states, she could.
Yeah. So this is where we both agree with one another, but I guess maybe disagree with the solution here. Cause like we agree that yes, white men, not exactly the best politics, right? Especially if their educational attainment is is at a high school level, right? The reality of the matter is that's the board. That's the game. You can't change the rules of the game midway through. You just get that. That's it. A Democrat, a liberal, and not saying FD is one, but a liberal looks at that and goes, we got to be more racist. I look at that and go, we got to offer them shit. Okay. One side is at least recognizing the anger and frustration that they have and constantly pulling on it and saying, you're mad because black people have a seat at the table. You're mad because trans people exist. You're mad because the Democrats only care about these people. Okay. And the Democrats look to that and turn around and say, yeah, they're kind of right, actually. Oopsie, we got caught. We do care a lot about trans people, but no, we don't anymore. I promise. Okay. I promise we don't care about these people any longer. And it's like, that doesn't change anything. The Republicans already dominate that space. They already have captured their attention. They've already used their anger and weaponized it against minorities. That's why they keep winning over these people. What you're supposed to do is go, nah, that's a distraction. Here's what your real problems are. I'm going to fix that shit. You know? You can't validate the right-wing position that is that comes from a place of anger and resentment and frustration and is used as a mechanism of distraction and deflection while they still rob you blind, while they still pick your pockets.
Couldn't get over the hump. There's so much talk about, how Trump gained with Latino voters, including Latino men. And there was a ton still of stupid and erroneous talk about Kamala losing black men, which is frustrating because I've been saying how that's bullshit for years now. And anyone who understands politics knows that that wasn't going to happen. If there's one silver lining to the failure of this election, is that it might finally put to rest that talking point among a lot of people, specifically black women. In an interesting turn of events, Asian women actually voted more for Trump than Kamala, which is not true for Asian men. I'll let you come up with your own conclusions there, or maybe don't bother. Don't bother to even bother the Asian women or the Latino men or the black men. Do not waste your time. Because at the end of the day, white people make up 75% of America's electorate, and no Democratic candidate has won the white vote since Lyndon B. Johnson in 1968. The Democratic presidents that have won since then have won with a strong showing amongst whites and an even stronger showing amongst minorities. That is how they win the election. It's never the will of the white people of this country to allow a Democrat to be president, not in the last almost 60 years. I don't understand how what I'm saying here is controversial. If you are...
It's not. I mean, he's right. That's why I think Kamala Harris was wrong. I think the reason why I think Kamala Harris was wrong was because she weirdly enough thought like she could, capture the attention of the white vote for some odd reason, and did that by parading the Cheneys around when white people don't with the Cheneys either. They don't with the Cheneys. They hate Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney's approval ratings were dog shit by the time he got out of office. They remember him as the architect of the Iraq War, understandably, because he was. Americans have moved on. They hate the Iraq War. They think it sucks. Donald Trump won, presenting himself as anti-Iraq war and portraying Hillary Clinton as a pro-war candidate in 2016.
Trying to understand the political reality of the United States of America, then all you're really doing is trying to understand the politics of what motivates white people to vote and be politically active. And I can only guess as to why a large portion of 76 million people who are white voted for Donald Trump. But more significantly, why in those swing states that won him the election, where he got more votes than his Republican counterparts by a wide margin from people who are not politically engaged, I can only assume that they felt something specific for Donald Trump that they didn't feel for Kamala Harris. And considering that this is a president who accused Haitian immigrants of eating people's pets and is threatening to use the American military on American soil to contribute to mass deportation, I don't know what motivated them. You tell me. If you can't tell, I'm really frustrated with how people are so dismissive of the role that racism and misogyny played here. Trump made incremental gains with almost every minority category.
I think this is the reason why people are dismissive of racism as well. He's not wrong. Of course, racism played a role. Like, of course, that's the only thing they have. But my point is, if the Democrats don't actually present an argument that the Republicans have to oppose, then they're going to run the table with racism. They're going to hit that vein over and over again. That's their one. They're going to keep spamming. Okay. They're going to keep spamming racism. You have to give them something to fight against. And the Democrats and their refusal to give the Republicans something to fight against is part of the reason why the racism button works so well. Is part of the reason why the trans shit even is like somewhat effective, even though it's not, right? Like it's not a thing that was a demonstrable success in the election, but a lot of Democrats seem to think so because they're like, oh, they made us look silly. They made us look bad. They made us look terrible. They made us look like we only care about the one policy that we care about is like doing bottom surgery on undocumented migrants or whatever the fuck. It's like, that would never be a point of contention if you had a bold declarative agenda that is something that the Republicans have to present themselves as against.
I want to point that out, right? Black men, black women, Latinos, Asians, and so many other folks, small gains for Trump. That probably is significant in terms of the margins for which he won. But for the most part, in those swing states where Kamala did nearly as well or better than Biden, the big change here is that her voter base in suburban and rural areas actually drops compared to Biden. The percentage difference between Trump versus Biden and Trump versus Harris in rural and suburban counties widens. Harris only doesn't get blown out because she was able to turn out large numbers of voters in urban areas, aka black people and white liberals, the same voter base that many on the left are accusing of her not inspiring. Now, of course, I would argue that those voters are probably more inspired to vote against Trump than to vote for Kamala. I know that's what it was like with Biden. But again, we're talking about the difference between a bad campaign and an effective one. And the only difference between her and Biden on paper is her skin color and her sex organs. Is there a version of Kamala's campaign where she ran as a changed candidate, promised?
I don't even fully agree with this. Like, she had benefits on that front too. She was younger than Biden. So I think like, while yes, her being a black woman as opposed to Biden being a white man, was definitely consequential, but her being younger and more vibrant and able to communicate was a benefit. Also, Biden would have lost harder than Kamala Harris. Age doesn't matter as much. No, with Biden, it did. It became the only thing that mattered, I think.
Universal health care and to save the environment and give stimulus packages to workers that wins her the election? Maybe. I doubt it, but maybe. But when you look at the exit poll data, 92% of voters that voted for Trump said Kamala was too extreme as a leftist. They called her a communist even as she ran a center-right campaign.
It's because, once again, if you have no North Star that you can point to in terms of easily identifiable policies, okay, bold, universal policies, then you can be made a mockery. You can turn into a clown by your opposition. This is a major problem with the Democratic Party's attitude whenever they run scared. That's it. That's it. Oh, Kamala Harris is a communist. She's too radical or whatever. Okay. Missouri voted to increase minimum wage by to $15 an hour and emergency leave, or paid family leave. Missouri also voted to enshrine abortion protections in their state constitution. And then they went and voted for Donald Trump. How the does that work? How does that work? The notion that like America is like unimaginably conservative is silly. It's just they hate the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party are not good at associating themselves with specific policies that are popular. They're too afraid of saying this is what we stand for. Okay? Universality works. One of Kamala Harris's most successful policies was one that she kind of dropped after the Tony West change in the campaign, and Mark Cuban started showing his ugly ass face around the campaign over and over again, talking about how great it is that Kamala Harris is going to be great for the billionaires and whatever, and great for the economy. And that was price gougers. She said she's going to go after price gougers. That shit was sitting at 83%. When it first got unveiled, it was at like 79% approval rating. And after a month of attacks from the Republican Party saying it's Venezuela, saying it's bad, that shit was sitting at 83%. And the Democrats were like, never mind. We're just not going to touch this, actually. This is terrible. This is too good for us. We shouldn't keep pushing that. How do you make this? How do you look at this and go, yeah, this wasn't the mistake of the Democratic Party, you know?
I said earlier about people not actually believing the things that black women say or do, only attributing them a set of woke features. No one in this election ran on policies. Trump said on the debate stage when they asked him about repealing Obamacare, which some Trump voters didn't even know was the same thing as the Affordable Care Act, that he had thoughts of a plan. He doesn't, of course. No Republicans have a plan to replace Obamacare, but they know that talking about replacing Obamacare gets those people in their base to vote. What are they voting for?
There's truth to this for sure. Republicans don't know what the fuck they're voting for. They literally, when the impact of the legislative agenda is brought forward to them, they just don't believe it. They're like, nah, that's not what I'm voting for. Yeah. The thing is, I think this race kind of showed that yes, Americans are definitely racist. They're bigoted. They're misogynistic. Right. But like Americans are suffering they're experiencing economic hardships. And if you present whatever you want as the solution to said economic hardship, they'll be on board. Now, if there's already an underlying there's already a resilient underlying white supremacist attitude, Republicans can look to that and go, yeah, you're suffering economic hardships. Oh, housing market is up. Don't worry, we're going to deport 20 million migrants. It's going to fix it. Oh, the cost of groceries is too high. We're going to deport 20 million migrants. It's going to fix it. Nobody even asked the second question of like how that's going to actually solve the problem, but it doesn't even matter. They just say we're going to deport 20 million migrants and it's going to fix it. They attach right-wing, white nativist, anti-immigrant policies and the fear of the other to the economic problems that people are facing. If the Democrats turn around and have no answer for that, if they don't run around and say, hey, listen, this deportation shit is actually ass. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? These are your neighbors. We're going to humanize them and actively campaign year round, okay, against this very obvious thing that the Republicans are going to spam over and over again. It's not like they didn't communicate that they were anti-migrant and Democrats got caught with their pants down. They knew that this is the one thing that they're going to constantly hit on because they never stopped hitting on it. If the Democrats had actually said like, no, we see you, we hear you, prices are up, we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it by going after price gougers. We're going to use the federal regulatory bodies to go after price gougers, to go after corporations and the billionaires of the wealthy that have f***ed over time and time again. I think that message would resonate with voters. Okay? It has resonated with voters. That's part of the reason why a lot of these cynical assholes in the Republican Party are now shifting in the direction of slight populism. Okay? They do that fake kind of left-wing populism, but in reality, they don't give a shit. But Kamala Harris was like, no, this is the opportunity economy. We're going to give startups $50,000 in tax cuts. It's like, I felt like I was losing my mind.
It's not policies. In some blind surveys on policies, when people got the issues based solely on what the person was going to do, these studies found that people prefer Harris's policies over Trump's almost categorically. Again, you can't tell me that Trump voters were inspired by his policies compared to Kamala's. There's no evidence that points to that. Harris did not run on some serious woke agenda. She didn't talk about race or gender hardly at all. She ducked the conversation around trans people, talked about strong borders, didn't mention the police violence or racism basically at all. She approved fracking, yet liberal pundits are trying to say she was too left and too woke anyway. So God forbid, she may have actually ran a populist campaign on change like Bernie did and talk about those things that are important to her base, because she probably would have gotten even worse. But if she were Bernie, if she were a heterosexual white man, I'm confident she'd have won with exactly the same campaign strategy of not really saying much, because again, that's what Biden did in 2020.
No, I don't agree, because Biden would have lost by wider margins to Donald Trump. That's why he had to drop out. So this is where I actually disagree with F.D Signifier vehemently, because there's a reason why Biden had to drop out, right? This election cycle. We're not even talking about 2020, because in 2020 he won. I mean, it's a bubble ring, okay? I'm sorry. No disrespect to my GOAT, LaGod James, but like it was the COVID bubble, okay? It was a Mickey Mouse ring for Joe Biden. Like straight up. It was a Mickey Mouse ring. It was a bubble ring. You know, he did not have numbers on the board like LaGoat did, okay? LaGoat, it doesn't matter. He would have won it nonetheless. Yeah. The internal polling was looking like Biden was going to lose New York, okay? It's not even a thing. Like, it's not even, I mean, this doesn't make any sense.
I want to be clear. I'm not saying that racism and misogyny are the only reason she lost. When you look at the info that we have, you recognize that she lost white voters, that many white voters stayed home, and that she did well in swing states despite not having policies, and that hundreds of thousands of voters showed up in swing states explicitly to vote for Donald Trump, who also didn't have policies. She even won independents. I was surprised at that. That was something that was not true early on in the election data, but in the aftermath of the election, she won independent voters. But those people that wanted what Donald Trump was selling, they came through for him, and they didn't come through for Kamala. I'm a researcher by trade, but I'm not a quantitative guy. I didn't do the most rigorous analysis here. I didn't run any regression tables. I welcome those of you who have that skill set to come and look at what I've looked at and come to your own conclusion. I hope that I'm wrong, to be honest. I wish we lived in a world where American voters cared so much about Palestine that they stayed home. I wish we had a voting population in this country that cared so much about policy details that they weren't inspired to vote for a candidate who provided none. But nothing in the data points to this. And I think we on the left need to get that through our skulls. Considering everything I've shown you here, I'm genuinely asking you in the comments, please, for my own sake, for everyone's sake, find a better explanation than racism and misogyny that actually makes sense. I'm begging you to prove me wrong with something more than willful ignorance and vibes, because the data points.
I mean, it's dog shit policies. Like, I think Kamala Harris is not a particularly charismatic individual. And I think on top of, you either have to have like, you know, ultra instinct charisma to make it work and to be able to like make third way neoliberalism come across sexy, which is very difficult to begin with. Or you have to be like, Bernie Sanders is not a particularly charismatic individual at all, but he's earnest. He's able to communicate honesty, right? And on top of that, he has great policies, popular policies. Kamala Harris had neither. She was not particularly charismatic. And on top of that, she was running the most third way neoliberalism agenda. Nah, Bernie is super charismatic. It's the accent. Yeah, okay, you're out of your mind. You also can't compare Trump not having real policies to Harris having half-ass policies. Progressives don't come out of half-ass policies or no policies. No. Donald Trump did come out with policies, but the problem is he at least pointed to the issues over and over again. He hammered it over and over again. the issues that people were experiencing. He was able to divert the attention, but he was able to basically channel the anger that people were feeling, channel the frustrations that people were feeling. And then he would just go, you're angry. You're right to be angry. You know why you should be angry? Immigrants. What is this? One Dime had a take on this. The idea that policy and economic conditions played zero role in Trump's victory and that Kamala Harris lost mainly because of racism and sexism and such cope is a narrative that neither is accurate or productive. It's very one-dimensional narrative that implicitly makes people so nihilistic that they abandon the working class because they're supposedly too white and reactionary. I agree. That's the other aspect of this, because you're not going to ever win. It almost loops around back to the Democratic Party's position, which is that, like, we're not woke. We're too woke. The Democrats are too woke to win elections, right? I don't think, by the way, this isn't F.D Signifier's position. F.D Signifier does not say that, like, it played zero role at all. But I think ultimately I look to the game, I look to the election, I look to the way that Donald Trump won and how he won, and I see two options here. Either the American whites are just far too gone and impossible to convince, and they're intrinsically evil and white supremacist, right? And it's impossible to ever convince them to vote for the Democratic Party unless you also become like evil and white supremacist to a certain degree, which is, of course, been a demonstrable failure, right? Or you have to try something different. Try something that the Democrats haven't really done, which is go out and push for bold, universal policies that help, universal policies that help everybody, including the white working class. Recognize the anxieties that they feel and try to desperately claw them back from the grips of white supremacist thinking.
Thanks to Trump uniquely motivating a specific type of voter that shows up only for him, only for his unique brand of racist, sexist, authoritarian posturing. He gets rural America voting in a way they traditionally do not. Trump could have...
Yeah, I mean, AMLO and Claudia Sheinbaum is right there. Mexican society is not more progressive across the board than America, right? They're not. Mexico has real problems with femicide. This is a real issue. And yet they voted for a Jewish woman in a 98% Catholic nation by wider margins that they'd voted for the old white guy that came before her. And there's a reason for that. There is a reason for that. And that is because AMLO expanded social safety nets, expanded the welfare state, and also very openly communicated that he was doing that over and over again. He was not afraid of calling out his enemies, right? And it's not like he was it's not like he was a what do you call it? Particularly woke, or it's not like he was it's not like he was like a card-carrying socialist either, right? He's not. But it didn't matter. You improve people's material conditions and they will never forget it.
Actually beating Obama in 2008. There's people like meaning like Obama's gonna come back in 2028 or whatever because Trump's gonna try to run for a third term. He's going to beat Obama too if we don't fix the actual core issue that this country's dealing with. So I'm sorry if I'm heated and I'm coming off like hot to anyone, but to me it's absurd that we're tossing out this explanation when it's the only one that actually tells us where we are as a country. There's a video from Innuendo Studios I like to talk about in these situations called There's Always a Bigger Fish. And it's to me one of the more important political videos on this platform if you want to understand what motivates the conservative mind. In this video, he argues that the embarrassed millionaire thing is inaccurate. I know a lot of people are saying conservatives vote for Republicans because they think they're going to be rich. And there's all these people that are like, Trump represents the lifestyle and ideology that I want to have, even though I work at Foot Locker and make less than $30,000 a year. He makes an argument that that's not really what it is. He argues instead that conservatives fight for power for other conservatives, not because they think that they'll be powerful one day, but because they feel like the people who have that power are supposed to have it. And they feel like people who naturally don't have power should never have it because they haven't earned it. And somehow how those who do have power did earn it. And this is why Trump can get away with saying that he started from a small loan of $1 million and had so many conservatives be okay with that. And this is what Trump presents to the world, this populist strongman figure that puts everyone in their place and cannot be controlled or held accountable in any way. This is why he had to say the previous election was stolen. And even as he faced charges and was convicted on some of these charges, it doesn't make a difference. It's why his assassination attempt was a huge deal for him. And the media and everyone else just keeps letting him get away with it. No matter how dumb he looks, no matter how little some of the things he says make sense, it doesn't matter because he's Donald Trump and he can get away with it. But you know who doesn't get away with anything in America ever? Black people. Especially black women. No group is more required to know their place and know their lack of worth in this country than black women. The double standards for women become quadruple standards for black women. Beyonce didn't even get nominated for a country music award. What the hell made you think that we were going to elect a black woman as president of the whole country, even in 2024? I'm sure you can pull out some surveys that say more left-leaning people would have voted for her if she endorsed a ceasefire or ran a more left-wing campaign. And of course, her decision to campaign with Liz Cheney and all the other.
I don't even personally think that like it's about left-wing candidates left-wing voters. Like this is also in part our failure to communicate on the left. Like I don't think Tim Walz is a socialist champion. Okay? I think that Tim Walz did a really good job in Minnesota by utilizing the 1-seat majority that they had in the state Senate to push for a lot of legislative changes in the state that impacted people's lives in a positive way, right? These policies might have been portrayed as radical, but it didn't matter because Republicans want to feed children too. Like they also benefit from these policies and they start recognizing that these policies are good. So I think like the left right dynamic here, or the woke, not woke dynamic, or progressive dynamic is not completely accurate. These are policies that are beneficial for every American. You know, that's it. It doesn't matter. Even if you don't vote for the Democratic Party, I think ultimately the goal should be to improve everyone's lives. If he's conceding that she never could have won, why isn't he way more pissed that she was a candidate to begin with? I think there's like somewhat of a stink associated with progressivism. That's the other side of this. Like a lot of people consider it to be a lot of people consider it to be like a electoral anvil on people's necks because most people don't understand it. They think it's like tied to liberalism, and people hate liberalism, even if they are themselves liberal. Like Republicans, they love liberalism. They do it all the goddamn time. It's monoculture. They just do it with a reactionary slant, a more reactionary slant than the Democratic Party's voters.
Other bull wasn't good. And I want to again be clear. Kamala wasn't that great of a candidate to begin with. In 2020, she was the first candidate to drop out. Do y'all remember that? For 4 years as vice president, she didn't do much to impress or inspire. And if the Democrats had a primary this time around, she probably would have lost to Amy Klobuchar or her own running mate, Tim Walz, or likely the next Democratic winner, if you want to put money on it, the American Psycho himself, Gavin Newsom. All of this is true.
I think Gavin Newsom gets comstered. I mean, it entirely depends. I think if the Democratic Party still go for like a Pete Buttigieg or a Gavin Newsom or a Josh Shapiro, especially Gavin Newsom, oh my God. I think if they do any of these guys, okay, but especially Gavin Newsom with that California stink on him too, unless the Republican Party has a direct line of lineage, like a successor, that they somehow develop. And I don't know if that's J.D. Vance, honestly, because he's patently unlikable. I don't know. Like the Republican, make no mistake, there is a holistic problem with the Republican Party as well. They're relying on Donald Trump's telegenic riz far too much. They tried to put an establishment figure that represented Trumpian politics and failed spectacularly. Ron DeSantis, right? They are kind of in their Obama era right now. In the same way that the Democratic Party was in its Obama wave from 2008 onward, and were never really able to recreate that same charisma and that's part of the reason why they keep losing. I think the Republican Party is going to experience a similar problem unless they find like a way out of this. I've said this a million times. Donald Trump is Obama for white people, like a specific kind of white person, if you know what I mean.
But that's not what happened. What happened is she ran and she almost won 4 swing states, and she lost because Trump brought out his squad. And his squad are rural Americans greatly unified behind some very, very specific interests. The reason I bothered to do this work is because I really need those to the right of me to stop blaming the far left for this loss. The numbers show we didn't do much. You're showing your own true colors with the way you're responding to this loss. You're proving everything we say about you to be true by pointing the finger at Palestinians, Latinos, and black men instead of some of your own cousins and husbands who have the real impact here. We barely had any impact at all. I also need those to my left to get a reality check because we barely had any impact at all. We are much further from our goals than many online like to believe. I'd argue that much of our behavior online, from the infighting to the purity testing to the constant engagement with rage bait, is a core reason why we're not nearly as far along as we think we are. We're chasing the feeling of winning something, anything, and getting it with mean tweets and comments while nothing is actually getting done outside of our screens. This isn't everyone to my left. You know who you are, but it's some of you, and you know who you are too. This election's results are beholding to the same massive forces that American politics have always been beholden to: white supremacist patriarchy in its varied and most subtle forms. Again, if you don't see the role that racism and misogyny played in this situation, I invite you to present your best argument in the comments. But then after that, tell me what you're doing next. One of the reasons I voted for Kamala is because I wanted to avoid making a video like this, because I knew as soon as she started losing that I was probably going to have to make something like this. Because while Kamala represents a horrible status quo that I've been talking about from jump, to again be clear where I stand, to me there's value in not resetting the meta of what resistance looks like to the institutions that both Trump and Harris really work for. I might be wrong about this. This is not a hill I'll die on. In fact, if you look at like the person that Trump disappointed as his borders are, that same guy that people are crying about worked for Barack Obama. Like, people that say that you can't compare the two, you're lying to yourselves. But anyway, in the aftermath of this election, the whole game has been reset. We're putting effort into settling down foaming at the mouth liberals who are going full mask off with Zionism, imperialism. We're also dealing with charged up conservatives preparing for the Christo-fascist regime that Trump is trying to put in place. Resources that may have went to further resistance for Palestine are going to be used to fight under the Muslim ban here in the United States. Bad immigrant policy that we already had is going to be leveled up to militarized mass deportation. And this isn't even getting into the drastic changes that will likely face LGBTQ people and especially trans people going forward. And I'm not saying all this to prepare for a future I told you so, because at the end of the day, Kamala and the Democratic Party deserve exactly what they get. They are bad for all the reasons we know them to be bad. And all the things we're complaining about are exactly why they're bad. So they deserve it, but we don't. So what are you going to do about it? After you leave your comment of approval or your comment of disapproval, what are you going to do next? What meeting do you have on your calendar? Have you reached out to your neighbors to see who you can coalition build with? Are you capable of protecting yourself or others?
I've been on his side and said he was right. Y'all white ass couldn't see why he's right. Isn't this just blaming everyone except liberals? I mean, he's blaming the Democratic Party, I think. Like the only issue I had with it was that go back, he soft calls you out. I think the only issue I had with his analysis was when he was talking about like Joe Biden would have won almost, like, or Joe Biden would have performed better than Kamala Harris, but like that wasn't correct. I think Joe Biden had to drop out because he was spectacularly bad because how old he was. And not only that, but also I just don't I mean, I think that it was bad campaigning overall, which I don't even think FD disagrees with. Like, I don't think FD disagrees with the fact that like policies played a role. I think I guess the disagreements that we kind of have are like how much of a factor Kamala's race and sex plays. I do think that it certainly played a role, of course. But I think that you can overcome those odds, and a good politician should be able to overcome those odds. And the only way to overcome those odds is with charisma. And more importantly than that is with good policies, because Kamala Harris was aware that racism played a formative role in the mindset of Americans, right? That's why she never did that Hillary Clinton style, like, I'm a woman and you have to vote for me. You know what I mean? She knew, and maybe even focused a little bit too much on the whites in the suburbs because of that, where she was like, oh, well, it's because I'm a black woman. They're never going to like me. So I have to do my very best to like get them to like me so that we can win.
This isn't everyone to my left. You know who you are.
This is not even a soft call out, man. What the fuck are you guys talking about? You guys are so silly.
And you know who you are too. This election's results are beholding to the same massive forces that American politics have always been beholden to. White supremacist patriarchy in its varied and most subtle forms. Again, if you don't see the role that racism and misogyny played in this situation, I invite you to present your best argument in the comments. But then after that, tell me what you're doing next. One of the reasons I voted for Kamala is because I wanted to avoid making a video like this, because I knew as soon as she started losing that I was probably going to have to make something like this. Because while Kamala represents a horrible status quo that I've been talking about from jump, to again be clear where I stand, to me there's value in not resetting the meta of what resistance looks like to the institutions that both Trump and Harris really work for. I might be wrong about this. This is not a hill I'll die on. In fact, if you look at like the person that Trump disappointed as his borders are, that same guy that people are crying about worked for Barack Obama. Like, people that say that you can't compare the two, you're lying to yourselves. But anyway, in the aftermath of this election, the whole game has been reset. We're putting effort into settling down foaming at the mouth liberals who are going full mask off with Zionism, imperialism. We're also dealing with charged up conservatives preparing for the Christo-fascist regime that Trump is trying to put in place. Resources that may have went to further resistance for Palestine are going to be used to fight under the Muslim ban here in the United States. Bad immigrant policy that we already had is going to be leveled up to militarized mass deportation. And this isn't even getting into the drastic changes that will likely face LGBTQ people and especially trans people going forward. And I'm not saying all this to prepare for a future I told you so, because at the end of the day, Kamala and the Democratic Party deserve exactly what they get. They are bad for all the reasons we know them to be bad. And all the things we're complaining about are exactly why they're bad. So they deserve it, but we don't. So what are you going to do about it? After you leave your comment of approval or your comment of disapproval, what are you going to do next? What meeting do you have on your calendar? Have you reached out to your neighbors to see who you can coalition build with? Are you capable of protecting yourself or others? What are you doing besides watching my videos? I don't know what should be done next. I'm just a creative. I'm not a leader or an organizer. I'm barely affiliated myself, but I will tell you, regardless of what you think of this video's thesis and me, now that the election is over, neither of those things are all that important. Whatever work you are doing or planning to do while supporting or resisting a Kamala Harris presidency, you should be doing the same exact thing under Trump. You need to wrangle whatever loose threads you have developed from this, get over whatever it is that you're needing to get over, and get back to work in whatever way you can. So in support of that, the pinned comment of this video will be used as a place to list organizing opportunities and networks of support. Please be responsible, as this is a Google platform that is public. None of this is secure, but if you have a safe way to share an org that you want to support and pull people into, please list them there, contact info for them, location, etc. in that pinned comment. Please put nothing else in that comment because I don't want it to get bogged down with debate. Feel free to broaden that discussion elsewhere in the comments, or if you're still not with me in my explanation, explain why. Again, I hope I look stupid. I hope this video ages really poorly because I'm just so wrong about American politics. Please show me how I'm wrong. For what it's worth, I'm praying for everyone to win regardless. That's all I got for today, y'all. No sponsor for this one. Peace, I'm out.
I agree with F.D Signifier that that racism plays a major role in this stuff in elections. I don't disagree with that at all. I think disagreeing with that would be disagreeing with reality. I just think that the way to overcome bigotry, the intersectionality of bigotry, you have to have a universal, bold agenda of change that addresses with honesty and earnesty the many problems that, white working class Americans as well as Americans of every background are experiencing. This is why I always stress the importance of universality, because I'm always like, listen, like black people are not magical, mystical beings. Trans people are not magical, mystical beings that are not that are not impacted by market conditions. In some ways, I think the Democratic Party has so successfully created this narrative that they weaponize against Bernie Sanders, for example, with cynical identity politics, where they were like, oh, Bernie is bad on black issues because he doesn't talk about criminal justice enough. It's like, first of all, he does. And secondly, not only does Bernie talk about that, but he also talks about other issues that are other issues that are genuinely impactful for everyone. Like when Bernie's talking about universal health care, if black people are disproportionately fucked over by the current healthcare system, given the economic conditions that black people are facing in this country, then universal health care helps black people too. It disproportionately helps black people, as a matter of fact. That's it. As long as you're not fucking running around and being like, yeah, no, we're going to do universal health care except for black people in the way that like FDR carved out, specific subsects of the American working class in the New Deal era, in the OG New Deal. As long as you don't do that, then it's great. And Democrats have cynically countered against that position, have cynically painted themselves as like, no, you can only be woke and an advocate for social justice if you're like if you're channeling hyper specific campaign promises.